Welcome to the Salience Podcast, where we identify what stands out from all the noise.
Today on the Salience Podcast, we explore safety through the intersection of human factors and systems. I really emphasize the word "and" there. So much focus in social media seems to focus on either human factors or systems. And I'm particularly interested in the relationship between humans and systems. Our guest today is Gareth Lock, founder of The Human Diver and best-selling author of the book Under Pressure, Diving Deeper with Human Factors. Actually, he's got a terrific tagline for his business, counter-errorism in diving. Although my background includes professional diving, and diving was a passion of mine for many years, I'm going to do my best to focus today's discussion much more broadly than diving, drawing on what we can learn from diving, but much more broadly. Before becoming a safety educator with a focus on diving, Gareth had a 25-year career in the RAF. As he started diving more and more, Gareth recognised he could apply what he learnt in the RAF to diving. In particular, he realised that safety and performance in diving operations is all about teamwork and learning from the successes and failures that occur as part of normal diving activities. As he explains in his bio, in the theatre of war, little mistakes around behaviour, poor decisions, incomplete situation awareness, and efficiency over thoroughness costs lives, and the same is true for diving. Dive teams are not always led well, and training tends to focus on technical expertise rather than people and relationships in teams. Welcome, Gareth.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to talk about my sort of passion and get these ideas across to people and have this conversation that has been sort of brewing for a while.
Yeah. We were just talking about how long it's been that we've sort of known each other virtually and our first time to really have a conversation. So, and one of the things I'd like to do is go right back before the RAF.
Mm-hmm.
And think a little bit about some of your own journey long before you're involved in the military. What attracted you to a 25-year career in the military?
Actually, it'll be quite a short piece because I joined the Air Force at 18. So I grew up in Scotland, just north of Edinburgh, moved up there when I was 4, and I got quite involved in Cubs, Scouts, Venture Scouts, and just the outdoors and doing stuff, sailing, climbing, all sorts of things like that. And the sort of the short development to get into the Air Force was Top Gun was released in 88, and that was the best recruitment film that the Air Force had. I applied in February 89, and I started my officer training course in August 89, just 18 years old. I was about the 4th youngest in the intake of about 150 people. I think we graduated 120. So it was a big sort of learning curve. And all through my sort of formative years, even, the sort of early parts of the Air Force as well, is just a drive to do stuff, to get stuff done and be really enthusiastic about it. And that sort of carried through when I became a flight instructor as well and a leader, is those people who are driven. They may not be the best, but they're the best students to have, the best team members to have, because they're committed to improvement. And I think, we sort of focus on those who are like us. And absolutely, those are the people that sort of, I look back on myself as wanting to grow and learn and improve and just make the best out of me. So yes, it was a fairly short piece before the Air Force because I joined when I wasn't very old. And I think that's an interesting piece about what shapes my view of the world as well.
Yeah, really interesting. You talk about this passion for, began with Scouts and Adventure, and then this wanting to do stuff, get stuff done. And when you look at the published literature on resilience, pretty well the number one thing is having a strong sense of purpose. And it doesn't matter what it is. It can be playing football, it can be tiddlywinks, it can be anything you like. Work, of course, And I think just having that real passion to get up out of bed and get stuff done, it's fantastic. I think as well, that focus on continual improvement, that wanting to be better. How did that then sort of cross into diving? What got you into diving? Was it again that adventure?
So in 99, I was on holiday. I'd done sailing when I was growing up. I'd got a sort of IYA dinghy certificate, but I hadn't taken it with me when I was on holiday, which I hadn't realized had been a sort of limiting factor. I can't sit on a beach and do nothing. So at that stage, it's like, right, what can I do? So I went around the corner and there was a sort of a Nielsen sailing academy. It's like, can I hire some dinghy? Can I hire a dinghy and go sailing? It's like, nah, for insurance purposes, you need to have booked this in the UK. It's like, oh. So sort of walking back, and there were a couple of dive schools in the harbour. One was a PADI dive school, and the other one was a British Sabbatical Club dive school. I didn't know anything about BSAC, but I knew about PADI. So it's like, right, there we go. Go in there. What's involved? How do you, what's the course? What's the cost? So we basically did my PADI open water training while I was on holiday in 99. And what was interesting is I look back there and I see where drift starts straight away. So my final qualifying dive, it was an 18-meter qualification, and we ended up going to 24 meters because there wasn't much sea life, there wasn't much to see at 18 meters or shallower than 18 meters. So I went to fill a logbook in with 24 meters, 25 meters, and the instructor said, no, you can't write that. You've got to write 18 meters because we're not allowed to have gone to that depth. I'm like, okay. And, none the wiser. And so that was 99. 6 years later, I'm on a course with the Royal Air Force in South Africa, and we go diving in a place called Gansbaai, and it's near Cape Town. And I hadn't dived between then. And so we basically got to the dive center. Here's the gear, put it together, off you go. No check dive, no real sort of check of skills or anything. And it was like, okay. A month later, I go out to San Diego, and this is where my sort of the crossover into the safety space happened. So I've only got 5 or 6 dives to my name at this stage. On the Saturday, I go and get 3 dives done with a guide, maximum depth 18 meters, had a great time bouncing around the surf, looking at the sea lions and everything else like that. And on a Sunday, there wasn't anything for the open water level diving, but there was some stuff to a place called Wreck Alley, where they've got a couple of artificial reefs off San Diego. But they're in 100 feet, 30 meters. And it's like, no, you're not allowed to dive that. You're not qualified. Oh, come on, please. I managed to sign a second waiver form that basically went, I was doubly responsible if anything happened on that dive. So I jump off the back of the boat, and my fin comes off. I sort stuff out. I start going down the shot line, and I can't put gas into my buoyancy compensation device, it's basically flotation. And I'm like, oh, this isn't good. But I know there's a hard deck at about 30 meters. I'm not going to sink into the depths. So I just hit the bottom in a cloud of silt, and we resolved the issue. It was a minor technical issue. One of the hoses had disconnected as I jumped off the boat. And we swam around and we did another dive. And I got back and I thought, how do I tell somebody that story? Because there's some learning to be had. And I think this is where, this sort of crossover is what could I learn? What could I take from one space to another? And this piece here was, how do I share that learning? Because how aviation is as safe as it is because the stories get told. And the recognition that we've got this variability of human performance, that we make errors, we slip, we lapse, we make those mistakes, and we work around systems to get the goals that we want. And I found it really hard to tell that story. So that was in 2005. I started to read more about human factors, and I started to get more involved in the diving space as well, and realizing that there were huge gaps in knowledge around human factors, non-technical skills, a just culture. Reporting systems were, and still are, very immature. They're very simple, linear. And that was sort of my foray into that space. I upset quite a few people in the process. So in 2011, I wrote a white paper that basically said the reporting system in the diving space sucks. It doesn't really add any value. It's very simple in causes, and you're not looking at the context and the story. And as a consequence, counting statistics and saying that you're making an improvement is hugely flawed, especially when underreporting. I reckon they were probably underreporting 10% of the events that occur. And so to draw statistics or, sort of ideas from that was wrong. So that was where my sort of stepping across into the safety space in diving happened.
Yeah, fascinating. I really like that story of, right from the get-go, going outside the parameters of your qualification progression. That's interestingly, I've got a similar story. My third dive was to 30 meters, and my buoyancy also didn't work on that dive. It was quite a brief dive because I was breathing very heavily and I was starting to run out of air. So we came back quite quickly because it was a long way down, and it's my third dive, right? So I was upping and blowing. And I that was back in 1984 for me. I was 16, right? Third dive. We just jumped in on this wreck in Britain. And because I moved around a lot, I found that the easiest way to get into diving was to just join another club. So I've trained with all of them. I've trained with the something like the SAA. It was a precursor. I've trained with BSAC. I've trained with PADI. I've trained with the Australian commercial system, ADAS. And it's interesting. I've seen lots and lots of really, really dodgy behaviour. But I've also been surprised. I remember one trip. I went with my partner at the time, and we booked a liverboard trip with this beautiful boat called the Kalinda, and it was with a university dive club. And I had very, very low expectations of a university dive club. The ones I'd seen were just death on a stick. But you know what? These guys were awesome. They were so professional. They were more professional than the professionals I'd been training with. And, really tight logging in and out, really good briefings, like proper up on it, really, really tight. So I was shocked. And it's always stuck with me that, sometimes you have a narrative. And I wonder, have you've identified some problems with reporting and you've seen some dubious behavior. Have you come across pockets of just awesome where you go, wow, look how tight this is? Where's been awesome?
So yes, and it's where I end up. There's this mantra: don't choose the agency, choose the instructor, and I get that because you want to have those people who are dedicated. In 2000 and must have been 6 is when I sort of got into diving more so in the UK, sort of from a holiday diver. And I would say I fell in with the wrong crowd of sort of a group of divers in the UK under a sort of trainee agency called Global Underwater Explorers. And their roots were in cave diving, very much about quality. It had a sort of a cultist approach, and still people think it's a cult. And that it certainly echoed with my views of military training of train hard, fight easy. So the training is certainly earned. It's not paid for. There's a mindset that exists within the teams, and there's mutual accountability. And I think that, to me, as an organizational level, it's there. It's still got gaps. It's still got problems. But I would say holistically across the whole system, that's where that is. And there are a couple of other similar agencies. UTD is another one, and they're sort of spin-offs from GUE. But it's a really interesting space in the diving world because it is really quite dysfunctional. It is driven by individual personalities and the want to improve. And because it's a discretionary activity, there's no regulation that says, well, there is some regulation, but it's not useful in that sense. Quality management is another thing that sort of sets GUE are part of having mandatory checks on every class. You don't get your certification until you finish that. The instructors have mandatory requalification periods where they will redo their skills in front of an instructor trainer. And that has a cost imperative. And so actually there's also a filtering that happens, that those people who want to invest their time and money are in that space. Now, some of them are doing it for ego, but some of them are, the majority of them are doing it because they recognize the harsh, hazardous environment that the underwater world is. There are compromises. It's a standardized set of procedures and equipment set, which means that means it's not perfect for every situation. But the compromise of standardization, or the benefit of standardization, overrules the sort of freedoms and optimizations for each particular location. So that's where I would say is probably some of the GUE teams would be able to execute some really complicated team activities, and then you can travel around the world, go and dive with somebody with a similar mindset, and you go, I know what I'm getting here. It's consistent and it's standardized.
Yeah, interesting you say that. When I first joined the Antarctic program and we're diving in Antarctica, I think it was a little bit like that. It was a bit hit and miss with different systems. We're trying to sort of standardize, and people had their own ideas, and there were some near misses, some really quite crazy stuff. And then the organization tightened it up and really standardized and dialed it in. And it did get a lot safer, I have to say. What kind of diving do you most enjoy? What was it that sort of floated your boat, or the opposite of that?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So I really, I was doing a lot of sort of topside photography. So the bit that floated my boat was wreck photography with divers in it. So wide angle, close focus, wide angle shots were my sort of speciality. And probably, the way that I progressed through my diving education was basically to have a stable platform to be able to shoot good shots. Because when you're doing sort of 30, 40, 50 meter diving and you're using natural light, you've got to have a stable platform because you've got slow shutter speeds. So I went through that progression as basically constantly, first sort of level of training, I want to go and do some wreck diving up in Scapa Flow up in the Orkneys. And that was my sort of, hey, wreck diving's cool. And then it was all about having a stable platform, be that at 30 meters, be that 45 meters, be that at 75 meters on Trimix. And not having to think about the diving aspects. So it was this bit about overtraining so that the technical skills became sort of second nature, and then taking limited cognitive capacity, cognitive loading, and then I can focus on what the shot looks like, where people are, keeping an attention on that, as opposed to being just stuck in the viewfinder and not seeing what else is going on around me. So very conscious of my own limitations, mental limitations, because of the work that I'd done in sort of human factors and non-technical skills, where task loading can just mean that people completely disappear down little rabbit holes, no idea what's going on. So that was, basically cold water wreck photography was my sort of area. And that's where it sort of continued till probably about 2 and a bit years ago, when I had a close call with a very blocked main artery, and I haven't dived since. I've got to get back to doing a medical. But that was a sort of weak signal in terms of there's some little, sort of discomforts going on. And it wasn't until I went in over a period of months, finally went in and had an angiogram, and they went, your lateral anterior descending artery is 95 to 98% blocked. It's like, oh, okay. So that was fixed with a couple of stents, and I just need to get back and get some medicals done.
Yeah, wow. I'm interested about, for listeners who don't dive and are not part of that world, I have a simple rule of thumb that recreational diving up to about 30 meters is kind of the recreational domain. 30 to 50, it's getting quite serious, and you need to do advanced training. Anything over 50 is a whole nother world again. We call it technical diving. So 75 meters trimix, this is not your run-of-the-mill wreck diving. And you need a lot of training and a lot of systems, and you need really good what's called top cover. The people on the boat above you really need to know what they're doing to support you to stay alive in an environment that's intrinsically trying to kill you. So I'm interested in two things. I'm interested in about what did you take from the military that you could then lend into those, particularly that 30 to 50, 50 to 75. What is it you brought from the military that let you take photographs in that really hostile domain?
So I think one of the bits, and why I gravitated to a sort of training through GUE, because of the teamwork and that sort of shared mutual accountability that exists there of we have trust with each other. And there was this piece that, you GUE divers, you're all elitist, you won't dive with anybody. And I would say, actually, that's BS. Up to 30 meters, I'll probably dive with anybody because it's self-rescuable, it's recoverable pretty easily. Between 30 and 50, so the sort of Tech 1 normoxic trimix levels, the pool gets smaller, but it wouldn't have to be a GUE diver. If I'm going into advanced trimix, hypoxic trimix diving beyond 50 meters, absolutely. It was a close team and we knew what was going on. And so we would have set protocols. We would practice drills. So there's this sort of standard joke of, all you do is you spend your time in the quarry at 6 meters just doing skills and drills. And it's like, yes. So then when the proverbial hits the fan, you don't have to worry about what am I going to do? What's somebody else going to do? If a failure occurs, I know that my buddy's going to sit here and provide me a stable platform to reference against so we can both solve that problem. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, was to take that teamwork, that team ethos, and create a good team, an operating team that were quite happy to call each other out. Gas analysis, pre-diving is a critical factor. There are so many divers who have died, unfortunately, because of breathing the wrong gas. And one of those sort of not, unmovable rules is analyze your gas before every dive. And people are going, I know what was in the cylinder. It's like, do you? How do you know? And so there was this sort of mutual accountability. If I'd look across at my buddy and see his cylinders and they wouldn't have an analysis tape with today's date on it, I'd call him out. Garth, did you do your gas today? Oh, shit, no, I forgot. Right, that's it. And if somebody called me out, or even sitting on a boat with 3 or 4 minutes to jump time, so the shot was in, the gate was open, and I looked down at my cylinder, my deco stage, 50% deco stage, and it got yesterday's date on it. And it's like, nobody's been on the boat. The chances of that being swapped out, having the wrong gas, almost nil. Helen, you've got an analyzer. Quickly take the first stage off, analyze the gas. Yeah, it's 50%. Right, fine. I know what's in there. And it's that belief in the systems, not blind belief, but this trust that having those protocols in place are going to reduce the margins for error. Now, some people sit there going, because diving is marketed as a safe, sexy, accessible sport for all, just don't recognize, even our 30-meter dive, it's a non-life sustaining environment. And what is quite amazing is I start to do, or I've done lots of sort of system safety, human factors work in the diving space. You just wonder why there's not more accidents than there actually are, given the hazardous environment. Now, I know there'll be lots of near misses, close calls. People have given up the diving because they sit there and go, you know what? That was a scary event. I don't want to be in there again. And those stories don't get caught, so we don't know the scale of the problem. And that goes against the commercial market that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Those commercial pressures lead to all sorts of shortcuts and dilute the desire for continual improvement and honest reporting. If I reflect there, what you really took from the military was I would call it a discipline. It was such a discipline to, again, for people who don't know anything about diving, diving in 6 meters of water in a quarry is extraordinarily boring. But that's the training environment where you can push the limits in different ways in a controlled context, constantly checking your gas, developing the protocols, developing the teamwork. It takes time, it takes discipline, and it's far more fun to just go out and do in a nice warm place, jump in the water and go blow bubbles. But that's not going to get you to 75 meters and back again.
And that back again is the important piece. Anyone can get to 75 meters. Getting back again is is where the skill sits.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like so many endeavors, isn't it? Getting there's okay. It's getting back is the real challenge.
Yeah, totally.
Have you had a critical incident yourself where you've had to draw on the team and the systems? Something's gone wrong, and then you're in recovery. Have you had any of those sorts of experiences?
No, I think part of that, so I recognize I haven't pushed the boundaries that far. Because I think part of that is prevention is better than cure. So it's that bit of actually understanding where the limits are, and I would say not being risk averse, but being sort of risk savvy or risk fluent, is understanding that's too much. I mean, we did talk about this sort of discipline. We were planning on doing a 90-meter dive off the south coast. It was going to be an open circuit dive, looking for a submarine that had been missing. It was about 5 hours offshore. And we did a full dress rehearsal in a quarry. And people would sit there and go, you did what? So it was 4 of us. We put the shot lines down. We had a surface manager. We had the support divers all set out. Because this is the first time that we were going to do a dive like this. And we wanted to make sure that all the protocols worked out. And so, people would sit there going, you did what? You burnt a whole bunch of helium in a quarry. What on earth for? It's because if we're 5 hours offshore, we don't want to be in a situation where a failure occurs and we can't deal with it. And actually that protocol process recognized that we needed to have a spare cylinder down with us, because if we were doing the first decompression gas switch at 57 meters, if that bottle blew for whatever reason, an O-ring split, then actually we wouldn't be able to get safely up to the next gas switch, because we couldn't share the gas because the depth was so high, because we were operating as a team. So we said, right, we will take a spare bottle and we'll clip it on at 57 meters. The time that it's going to fail is when we turn the cylinder on, because that's when the O-ring's going to blow or whatever. After that, we can just take it up with us. But that's the critical piece. So it's going through these things in a critical thought process to sit there and go, right, how do we stop those things from occurring, or reduce the likelihood of those things? And if they do, how do we fail safely as a consequence?
Fantastic preparation. Just reflecting, I've only really had one really very spooky protocol. I was part of a dive team in Antarctica, and it was really interesting. It was a shakedown dive, so it was the first dive of the season. I was out with a buddy. We're both on surface supply. We've got a full face mask. It was pretty cold, and we're at the full extent of our hoses. We're about 100 meters, maybe 150, something like that, and we're a long way out under ice. And my air ran out. We've got a tiny bailout bottle. I can't remember how big it is, but you don't have a lot of air. You've got this tiny bottle to get back on, and you can't really air share with your buddy. You've got full face mask. It's -2 degrees, the water temperature. You can't see anything. If you take your mask off, your eyeballs don't love freezing conditions. Yeah. And I indicated to my buddy, and comms was breaking down. We were too far away. I said, hey, I've gone to bailout. Indicated to him. We slowly started heading back. And the first thing I said to myself, internal voice, it said, just really calm.
Yeah.
Slow as you like, super slow. This is all about controlling your breath. And I'm about halfway back. We're still a long way to go. And my buddy's right next to me, right there. And I remember thinking, if I run out of air, I'm just going to pass out and let them drag me to the surface. But I'm not taking this mask off. I don't want seawater in my lungs. And you know what? I was really relaxed about it. because I trusted the top side. They knew what to do. And if I went unconscious, they'd get me back. I was very confident of it. Whether that was naively confident, but that was the story I was telling myself. And I kept super calm, really relaxed breathing. We missed my deco stop, of course. We just got to the surface, and I still had, just enough to make it back. But knowing that the team above me knew what they were doing, even though we'd had a technical error, I think it was the difference between me being calm and me potentially panicking.
Interesting. So one of the other things that, I sort of took from the Air Force was that bit of the learning piece, what changes. And I remember a phrase from a presentation given, which was, a lesson is not learned until you've put something in place and the change has happened. Otherwise, it's just lessons identified. And it's one of the sort of key things that I take into sort of the consultancy and the training is, what did you learn from that? And to me, if you got back with just enough gas and you remained calm, there probably isn't enough gas in that bailout at the full extension to make it back if you're basically now going, and you double your breathing. So did they change the bailout cylinder size as a consequence of your event?
We did, actually. Yeah, they significantly increased the size of it. We worked out what the problem was. In fact, there was a reluctance to go quite that far with the hoses. I think we kept them the same, but there was a big discussion: do we need to restrict the operating distance as well?
Yeah, change the procedure.
Yeah, absolutely. Change the procedure, bigger bailout, and reviewed the distance from the hole. We kept it the same in the end, but it was part of the review process. I really like the emphasis you have there on the lessons learned and putting them into practice. I so often see the reports go out, people, and often there's consultants involved. They pay a fortune for the analysis and the review. And then, one or two of the easier things get done, but the real nuts and bolts, it's like, they get glossed over. That doesn't really happen. Yeah.
And I think part of the other thing is that any of those recommendations in a learning review or a sort of an organizational review, those recommendations are just hypotheses for change. There's no guarantee that they will make a difference, but you can guarantee that they can't make a difference unless you start putting something in place. And it's also this bit of, we've done that tick. Did it make any difference? No. Well, we didn't learn anything. Well, actually, we did. We learned that didn't cause a change. So there's often this bit of, we will only put things in place that we know will succeed. But you won't know that until you put it in place. And so if that recommendation didn't work, well, try something else. But you have gained knowledge. It's not that you didn't learn anything. It's just that thing didn't work.
I think in addition to that, there's also I'm okay with a series of recommendations. If somebody, usually the person in charge or the business owner or the agency lead, looks through the recommendations and says, I'm going to accept all of these ones, but this, and this, we're not going to do for the following reasons.
Yes. Evidence them. Yeah.
Evidence them. Say, here's the reason we're not going to do them. But what often happens, they just ignore big chunks of what's recommended. And it's just such an incomplete response. And people obviously get pretty grumpy when they spend a lot of time giving quality feedback and then they don't have that really quality. We're going to implement these, but these are maybe not pragmatic. They're not possible. It's $1 million. It's not $100,000. Whatever the reason, it's okay to say no.
And you've got to provide that feedback. And I think that's the critical thing, is to then provide feedback to the team, the organization, the individuals that says, we can't do it because of X, Y, and Z. Have you got any other solutions to say, how do we achieve that same effect at a lower cost or a quicker outcome or something like that? So being creative and understanding that actually you've asked for a solution. What are the other opportunities to get maybe a 70%, 80% solution to achieve a similar outcome?
Yeah, I like that framing too, that, we're using the feedback. What could we do that might meet that intention, the 70 or 80%? And then we can ask the question, is that okay?
Yeah.
Are we prepared to accept a 70 or 80? And then we've all got choices to make, haven't we? I was talking to my buddy Gary about an hour and a half ago about risk and the boundary conditions within culture, and knowing who's at the edge of the boundary, who's over the boundary, and where do you sit. And, you've always got a choice. The choice might be, I see what's going on here. I'm okay with them going over there, but it's not me. Or I'm actually not going to work with this place. So it's there's a strong culture element, isn't there? And I think that's something I'm particularly interested in. And I want to, what's your take on, you mentioned earlier about weak signals. What's your take on some of the weak signals in culture of teams that you won't walk past? What is it that you're looking for? And what would be the signal of, I don't think so, not with this lot?
So it's an interesting bit of weak signals. For a start, you've got to know that they exist as a concept, because you can't go looking for something that you don't know is there. And for me, I've got a team of 10 instructors that work with the human diver to deliver the training materials. And the weak signals for me is when I don't get dissension, when I just get a unified, that's a good idea. And you sit there going, is it really? I've got some ideas. What is it? Is there authority gradient? There is authority gradient. How do I create that psychologically safe environment that allows those little ideas to come to the fore and the challenges to come to me? And when they happen, like they've had recently in some of the meetings, and it's like, thank you for challenging me. And, recognizing that dissent, because the phrase I use in the sort of learning teams deliveries is none of us is as wise as all of us together. And that only applies when we don't have groupthink. Because if we just have a situation where everybody's just following, sort of the hippo, the highest paid person in the room, then actually we just end up being blind and we just follow around. So to me, the first bit is creating that environment where you can get people to speak up and put those weak signals in place. And the next bit then is, okay, now we're getting some of those stories. Their truth is their truth. It may not be your belief about what's going on. And that is, I think, a critical piece where we're talking about learning from events, positive and negative, is this bit of collecting multiple narratives that are out there. Because each one of us will make sense of a situation based on our previous experiences, our culture, our ideas, our goals. You will take a different thing from this podcast that I do. The listeners will each take something different from it based on their history. And that applies in the real world. So if you are in a leadership position and you're used to and not realizing it being in a sort of authoritative, directive approach, then that's how you see the world. And it's why I have a problem with this bit of treat other people how you would want to be treated yourself. Now, the downside with that is if you want to be directed and have authoritarian approach to you, that works for you, but it might not work for others. And so we have to be contextual, we have to be situational, we have to understand what it is that others need. Sometimes people say, we've got to have servant leadership. What is it that people want? Some people just want to be told what to do, and they want to be the sheep, but others want to have that freedom. And the only way you can find out, go and have curious conversations with people. What makes them tick? Where do they go? And then you will start to uncover those bits because you've now started to create a trustworthy environment where people feel safe to speak up and give you those little weak signals that you probably didn't know about beforehand. There's a whole bunch of their stuff, sorry.
Oh, that's fantastic. Interestingly, we've got a lovely intersection with some of the things that we teach in Frontline Mind. We only have what I call an imposition, emotion or a state, and it's curiosity. That's the only one that we'll impose. We don't impose confidence. We don't impose anything else except curiosity because it's enormously valuable across all contexts. You said that I love the way you challenge servant leadership, and you say, it all depends on context. And we would say, we would teach what we call adaptive leadership.
Yeah. Situational adaptable. Yeah.
And also the main thrust about your people and this dissension, the ability to speak up, is you said, their truth is their truth. But really what we're doing here is we're surfacing different perceptions with respect. And ideally, I love you said, the top thing you came in with as your number one red flag was, if I don't have dissension, I start to worry. I need my 10 people to be able to call it out and challenge me. So much really good quality stuff. They're all relating to those weak signals. It's absolutely on point.
Excellent, thank you. And when you get that challenge, you sit there going, oh, and then you've got to reflect on it, and that's the difficult piece. And then when you've reflected, you've got to go back and say, I've reflected, and this is what it is that where I was coming from, because I have my perspective too. But it's being open and owning it. Yeah,
absolutely. You might have answered this question, or you might have a different answer, and it relates. So we'll see. I'm broadening now from diving from business into anything in the world, and I'm asking, what if you could direct people's attention to anything in the world? What would it be? So it's a sort of step back. It might be the same as what you've said, or it might be a different answer.
It's slightly different. And I think it's because of the work that I do. It's because of the studies that my wife has done, some recent sort of readings and watchings. And it's all about understanding the power of language and linguistics. And this concept that that language, our words change our world, how we communicate with people, the way that we communicate. I'm running a 10-week webinar series, live webinar series at the moment, and the last module has been communication. And I've got somebody who's got a master's in linguistic. I'm going to say it's not literacy, it's relativity. So how cultures shape the language we've got. And so I would say Lira Boroditsky's TED Talk, highly recommend that. The work of Krista Vessel, so those who are in the safety space, looking at the power of agency to shape the way that we write reports or learning opportunities. And just be curious about the language, because each one of us will have an idea how we express that. So that would be, sort of language and linguistics. Just don't miss this whole bit of the power of language. We can really miss how important the way we say things and how stuff comes across. And that sits at the center of the non-technical skills crew resource management work. Which, the framework that I do is, in a team, you want to create this shared mental model so you understand what's happened, what's happening, and what's going to happen next. Well, you can only do that when you communicate with other people. You can't mind read. So how you get those messages across in a way that is clear and concise with limited ambiguity, it's all about communication.
I couldn't agree more. Have you looked into metaphors, the power of metaphors within that language package?
Yes. Well, James Pomeroy on LinkedIn produces some fantastic stuff in that space. So there's another one to go and find in terms of the way that we get ideas across. And, a lot of what I do is about storytelling and trying to bridge across from one space to another. And I find it a very powerful way of reducing professional jeopardy. So if I talk about a different environment, so yesterday I was giving a presentation at a commercial diving conference, and I started off by telling a story about a train driver that end up having a child in the cab of the train, and they passed a signal at danger. So they had a SPAD. Now, they wouldn't have found out about that child had they not had the SPAD and the SPAD was investigated. And then I purposely use that because you sit there going, how often do you have events that don't get picked up because they haven't been investigated? And so then you start bridging across. So metaphors, analogies, stories, absolutely key. But if you want to learn stuff, go and find James's work on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I also follow James. Well, there's lots to synthesize here. I usually set myself a challenge to summarize the salient points, and it's one of the things I enjoy doing. I've got 3 or 4 things that really stand out. I think the language and the communications, wholeheartedly agree with. I think your description of the weak signals and the importance of that within safety, I think was a really nice articulation. So I think that's one of the salient points. I also took away the importance of linking that dissension and the feedback process into practice. If you don't take action, you've got a lesson learned from your after-action review or whatever you want to call it, but you don't put it into practice, then really you've got a breakdown in your system. And then right at the top of my page here with my notes, I've got a really exquisite description of the importance of discipline. Mm-hmm. When you're in high risk consequential environments, using discipline into your training, even when that might be quite boring, or even when you're pretty certain and you're just about to get in the water, but you realize that the tag's yesterday's tag, not today's tag, and you say, you know what, let's just go back and let's do it anyway. Let's stick to our system here. Yeah. And that was the thing that I particularly carried on. I love that discipline.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I got, I know you've just summarized it, and there's a piece that you said about the weak signals. And one of the things to bear in mind, people can't speak up about things they don't know. And so we often ask people to speak up and challenge. But if you don't know something, how do you speak up about it? And so that's a responsibility for you to go looking for that as the leader, to go and find those weak signals, to be proactive, because they're going to be really hard. So apologies for adding something to your summary.
No, that's a beautiful segue. So we train frontline agencies, police, prisons, healthcare. And the number one thing we train for teams is socializing the words, I've got an uneasy feeling about. And what we say is, we don't care what it is, but if you've got an uneasy feeling about something, we want that to be the trigger for a conversation where everyone will stop and respect the uneasy feeling. And it might be that when you've had a conversation, you go, oh, no, that's actually okay. Or it might be you go, and here we are, we've uncovered something that was waiting to go off. And that's the number one thing we bring into teams, where if they can all walk away and say, I can talk to my team at any point and say, I've got an uneasy feeling about, they won't rubbish it, and they'll respect that this is just my intuition. I might not have words. It might just be the hairs are up on the back of my neck. Something's not right. We'll stop. We'll pay attention. Let's work as a team and uncover what that might be.
That's brilliant. That's really cool. Absolutely. That's really good. So thank you for that. Thank you for the insight. I always learn something from the podcast too. So thank you for that.
Yeah, great. Well, look, we started exploring your early days. Where to next? What are your future aspirations, either at work or elsewhere in life? One of them is to get your medical and get back in the water.
Yes, that's one of them. I think the other one is a bit sort of deep and philosophical, and that is, who am I and what's my identity? And the reason why as that's going at the moment is, I do a lot of stuff in the diving space, in the sports diving space. It's needed, but is it wanted? And so the diving community absolutely could do with more of this. And I've built my whole identity around that. But I don't really care who I talk to, who I teach. It's about an attitude of somebody who wants to learn and grow. and it doesn't matter what space it is. So I'm sort of growing more in the non-diving space and human in the system, but I'm still passionate about the diving world. And I think part of that is because I've got an insight into how dysfunctional and complex the environments are, not just the technical environment, but also the social, cultural, commercial environments, which make it hard to try and bring what you would consider sort of traditional safety into these spaces. So that's both a sort of a personal and a professional growth bit is, first off, who am I? What do I do? Next bit is, where do things grow, and understand what the wants are? Because nearly all of what I do is discretional in nature. It's not regulated. Even in the non-diving space, it's not really regulated. And so it's finding people who want to, leaders in organizations who want to learn and grow and go beyond the compliance space. The discipline, there we go. We go back. I want to find people who want to have discipline in making their systems better.
I wonder if that's a search for a unicorn.
Well, they exist. But it's whether or not there's a suitable business model that goes there. So,
yeah, I think from my experience is that I absolutely get that distinction between what they need and what they want. I think sometimes when you can make the connection to the legislation and the compliance and some of the changes, that can be just enough where you can bridge that gap between need and actually I do want it because I don't want the pain of when this goes wrong and what it means for me. I think I've got maybe this helps you with your search for, and I always say to people, your identity is whoever you choose to be, and it's the stories we tell about ourselves, isn't it? And I think if anybody wants to know more, Gareth's book, Under Pressure, is available from Amazon. It's on audio, an ebook, and also check out his website, humaninthesystem.co.uk, and follow on LinkedIn. Thanks, Gareth, for today. What a great conversation.
Brilliant. Ian, thank you very much, and have a great week.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Salience Podcast. Please leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Frontline Mind newsletter by visiting our website at frontlinemind.com. Have you got a topic you would like some more salience on? Send us a message on LinkedIn or email team@frontlinemind.com.